You're here to study Bridgman. This is recording 5 on twisting forms from our Summer Bootcamp 2020. I think every person, Vera, I'm going to step out. Every person should be greeted by name and a song. You can start, and if you get tired of singing, it's Mike. Mike gets to add in. And Phoenix, if you're going to earn your keep as a co-host,
oh God.
This is your job. This is your job. Live is all about finding unlimited nows. A word of wisdom from Myrta. Thank you, Myrta. Here we are in July of 2020. This will be a year that history will look back on for more than one thing. But what I hope is that you will look back on your history as having gone through. We're going to develop the boot camp thing today. We're going to look at Nicolaides and Muybridge to do some exercises, and we're eventually going to look at the homework. And then I'm going to put you on some projects. I'm going to give you a choice of 2 projects. If you did the exercises last night or this morning on striking the pose, I'm going to introduce you to a new exercise by Nicolaides called potential gesture. Exercise number 4. So he's got it right there at the beginning. This is an exercise I have occasionally made use of trying to explain what I mean by the impulse of the gesture. The model takes 1-minute gesture poses as usual, and you make scribbled drawings. Instead of drawing the pose you see, however, draw what you think the model may do next. Of course, the pose you draw will seldom be the pose the model actually takes, but look why I put it in bold. The effort to realize how the model could move from his present position, what it would be possible for him to do and what he might want, will help you to understand the forces at work behind the action you see. If you had a good acting teacher, many a good acting teacher will always point back to this, that it is not the pose. There was a kind of acting in the early 20th century that, as Don said, thankfully fell by the wayside, where there were stock poses for grief and stock poses for joy and stock poses for all this stuff, and it always felt fake. And modern acting in particular got to understand that the action, the physical position, comes from something. 2 things, actually. What the character wants, and very important, what the character is feeling emotionally. Now, that's what Nicolaides, at about the time that that fake acting method went out, Nicolaides was pointing artists to the same thing. If you're going to draw characters, you may not be acting them, but you sort of are. Animators do that too. And so, when you see this guy in this position and you didn't see any of this stuff ahead, you might figure that he's going to reach back even further. Or you might see that he's going to reach down to pick up a kid. Or, in this case, he happens to be ready to strike a blow. Well, it makes sense that if he was going to reach down to pick up a kid, he wouldn't want to get the greatest momentum. So he wouldn't have, watch this, he wouldn't have brought his shoulder back, right shoulder back, so that you can see his torso in side view, whereas his pelvis is positioned where you can see the back of it. But he's trying to wind up as much so that he's got the maximum swivel on the y-axis. That's called yaw. Except I should be doing it this way, not this way, because he is swinging where it's going to go down and forward. I'm not going to have you do the exercise now. I am going to leave that up for a few moments so that if you get bored with talk, oh, that's very good, Jesse. He also loaded weight on his left hip. He loaded the weight there. Why? Why? He might even be lifting that up a little bit. Why? So he can lean forward. The leg that's forward is where the momentum wants to be to get the maximum force. Now, you know what's interesting? A kid will do that when they strike a blow. A 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old is going to pick that up, and they never thought it through. They merely felt it, and yet the emotion led to all that analysis on a subconscious level. But can we do that? Can we do that on a subconscious level with drawing? Yes. A.B. Frost, Glenn Keane, Milt Kahl, if you don't know Milt Kahl. But these are people who have gone through a great deal of thinking it through, analyzing it, and studying it first. Now, I'm going to leave that up in case you say, Marshall, you go ahead and talk. I'm going to tune you out. I'm going to choose any one of those poses. Animators like to choose extremes. That's an extreme. It could be even made more extreme. You could say, no, the next thing he's doing is pull back even further because I'm not limited by a body. I can draw. And this could even push a little further forward. I'm going to leave that up to you because I have a raised hand about what I was talking about. Let's go to Q&A. What is meant by the next pose? Anything? Barbara, a question like that, let me tell you what is meant by the next pose. What you choose. What I just mentioned, I may have answered it. An animator will choose keyframes or extremes. But I don't know that I'm going to take time in the class to, I'll take 30 seconds. Keyframes are important because without them, you can't know what's going on in a story. Keyframes are the graphic novel panels. Keyframes are the separate storyboard panel that makes point after point after point for a shot. Keyframes tell a story. Extremes are extremes of positions. And that's what I was referring to when you might say the next frame is him even further back. Watch this. You could say, and I'm going to make his whole body, he's going to pull on the muscles back here to make him go straight up and down and lift this foot off the ground so that it'll have even more momentum. Extremes are how far the pose goes before it reverses its position. Barbara, I hope that helped. That's the shortest I can do. Okay, the raised hand meant nothing then. The raised hand was like somebody throwing pebbles at the window saying, help, help, help. And then I say, hang on, let me finish my train of thought. And then I look out the window and I say, what's wrong? And you hear nothing. And so you say, I guess there's nothing wrong. All right. I'm going to switch gears in a moment. But let's wrap up what the point was. Point number 1 was your homework was about empathizing with the character. Have you seen the Proco video that he did on balance? I watched the premium one, and gosh, that was really good. He took all the stuff in these different books about the vertical line and how if you get on one side of it, puts it in motion and how you can play with that. That's, I think, of the sources I know, that's the best one for physical balance. This is not about anatomy as such. It's not about form as such. It's a little bit about technical understanding. It's a great deal about feeling and sensation and empathy, and that I am not posing a mannequin. It's not a marionette that I'm struggling with to get it into a position. It's something that has its own impulses, and being in touch with that part of this class, part of your homework. Hey, one of the things that happens when a person throws a punch is that they throw it forward, and then when they've thrown it forward, they don't say, and now I'll fall over that way. At some point, the punch has been thrown, and they pull it back. And the loop that I showed you yesterday, as he goes wham, 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 because it goes back and forth, or forth and back, it does something that is everywhere in nature. It's the first thing you heard regularly in your developing consciousness was a rhythm of your mother's heart, but not just of her heart, but of her moods and her motion and her stillness and everything else. One of the points Bridgman makes in the book is that there is rhythm everywhere. Life is full of this breathe in, but you don't breathe in, breathe in, breathe in, breathe in, breathe in, breathe in, breathe in. Eventually you breathe out, but you don't just breathe out, breathe out, breathe out. There is a back and forthness. Bridgman says this is important in a couple things. One is the body of that model, and the other is the pattern of your drawing. I am going to put this slide up of Bridgman's work because we talked about it yesterday. This is minus the pendulum. We talked about this yesterday. These are static, not in motion. Now we've got someone who's in motion, and presumably if we were in his body and he has got the weight on this leg, you can tell because a vertical line tells you that. So if you're going to sketch that, you might sketch a rhythm of meanders. But at some point you'd say there is his pit of the neck or the big bulk of his body, and if I run a vertical line down, it doesn't run right on that foot because he's not just putting his weight directly on that foot. He's got a little weight over here. And he's also got that leg pressed out there while he's got this arm thrown back here. So he's trying to distribute his weight over some center point so he doesn't fall over. So he's not really in motion. This is still. But what's he bound to do next? If he's having a ball, I think he is bound to switch legs. That's potential gesture. You can imagine it. You can honor that it has extremes. Anna asks, is it equally beneficial to try drawing the previous action of a figure also, or is it only beneficial to predict the next action? Anna, good question. Yes, of course. It's useful to say what happened before this. George Pratt and I got to teach storytelling together. George Pratt had an exercise he puts students on that I thought was great. You take a photograph. It's cool to take photographs from another era. Shorpy.com is a place of these old photographs, and you go to the section at Shorpy.com. I'm putting it into the chat so you'll have the name. They've got a section on children. These are children in New York City and others back in old black and white photographs around the turn of the 20th century and early 20th century. And the reason they called it Shorpy.com is they got some kid holding these oil pails named Shorpy. That's all they know about him. And it's so iconic. You look at a picture and you say, this picture could be in the middle of the story. Tell us what happens before and tell us what happens after. Or you could say, this is the final picture in your movie. Tell us what led to this. Or the Norman Rockwell thing. He'd always start his illustrations with a drunken sailor near a street lamp. And then just see where it goes. This is the opening image of your story. What happens next? Any of those things are triggers for the imagination of the imaginative storyteller. So if that works for storytelling, back to your question, Anna, why not play this game? And there is one reason why some people wouldn't play this game. It's because it takes time. It takes energy. It's an investment. You got to sit down and really give yourself to it. You can't multitask when you do this. But if you're storytelling, image maker, if you're a storytelling figure artist, it would be a great thing to do. What happens before, what happens after? Then if you are the graphic novelist, if you are the storyboard artist, that thing that I showed quickly yesterday, that slide from Skydoll, you know, where there was a point where 2D animators were being laid off like crazy about 20 years or so ago. And there was a pause, and then there were all of these great graphic novels. Many of them came out of Europe. Many of them came out of France. They were animators who decided to do graphic novels. I mean, the drawing was incredible because animators will see it from this, thousands of times. So when they are struggling to do a graphic novel panel, they don't really have to struggle. They can see it and they can choose the most evocative pose. Okay, I hope that was helpful. And you know, I should have had this up while I was saying that, because these are not necessarily sequential. There is the skill of knowing the figure as anatomy and form, and the skill of feeling the feelings of the human body with sensations. There's more than one skill there. You can be the best anatomist and draftsperson and have no empathy with the body. That it's all a medical illustration. That it's all exactly accurate, but has no, it's not a character. On the other hand, you can have tremendous skill at empathy with the body and not know how to draw it. Now, I hope you see my point. There's more than one skill just in this fundamental how to draw the figure. You can know anatomy like a surgeon, but not know the forms as blocks and cylinders that you can draw. Okay, anatomy isn't enough. You can know all the anatomy and none of what it does. That's why they separate in medicine anatomy and physiology. Anatomy is what it is. Physiology is what it does and how it works. Artificial intelligence may know all of both of those things thoroughly, but it's a computer and it can't empathize with what those sensations feel like. But here is the next skill. When we make a drawing, we put lines on paper. And if they're all the same angles, or they're all the same thicknesses, or they're all the same closedness, or they're all straight, or they're all curved, regardless of whether they're human beings or not, if we put lines down that are too all the same, there's too much of the same thing, and we need some graphic balance, some back and forthness. Look over there in the upper right. What does this have to do with a human figure? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with a human figure. She's lifting up some drapery. It has to, no, read what he says. Read what he says. He cares about that it's curving this way and it's kind of at a right angle. And then it's curving the other way and it's a more acute than a right angle. And then it's curving quite roundly and a very straight line there. And it's also, look how severe these lines are. And over on the other side, look how mild they are. They all line up on one line. Look at how heavy he dug in there and how light he dug in there. And look at how this neck, which is physically impossible, it makes such a beautiful, graceful curve. But the audience can't even see it. The audience might not see it consciously, but the audience feels it. If you're taking notes, you might on one side of a portion of paper put human body, and underneath human body put anatomy, function or physiology, what it is, what it does. You might put form, perspective. You might put empathy, sensation, gesture, pose. That would be on one side of the paper. On the other side of that portion of the paper, you would put design, picture, composition. You might say graphic design, because that makes it clear. We don't mean the design of the body as a mechanism. We mean the design of the flat surface. Graphic has to do with writing on a flat surface. The calligraphy, the beautiful penmanship. Beautiful penmanship is beautiful penmanship regardless of what the words are. Beautiful design, evocative design, disturbing design, graceful design, deliberately awkward design is that way regardless of whether it's a human body or an animal body or a fire tornado or a building. Okay, I hope I've made my point. Various skills, and we're spreading them apart to understand them, and then we're spreading them apart further. Nino Lobo, could you give us examples to look for? Artists maybe, of these two different abilities? Yes, I can. In fact, Nino, the best example I know of is the one that's right in front of your face for this purpose. Oh, of the two different abilities, someone good with anatomy but lacking with connection with the body, and the other way around? Yeah. The best example of good with anatomy but lacking of connection with the body for empathy was deliberate. It was someone who that was their job. It was the thing that Robert Beverly Hale pointed out was a benefit of this book. He's not trying to show us how this guy works and his gesture and position and empathy. He is trying to show you pure anatomy and form. It's not a criticism. It's actually saying, look, we don't want to complicate matters. Richer is easier to learn anatomy from than Bridgman. Why? Why is Richer early? Why is Rubens, R-U-B-I-N-S, why are they easier to learn anatomy from than Bridgman? Because they only teach you one thing at a time, and Bridgman has got about 5 or 6 masterful things going in there. And regarding people who are great at gesture, but they don't know the anatomy, there was a little girl named Nadia, Nadia, who had a gift for drawing, British, I think. She didn't know anatomy or anything, but gosh, she'd draw a horse, she'd draw a figure, and they were expressive in remarkable ways. Most children's drawing has this quality. Gymnasts are great models as point of view. Yeah, gymnasts, skateboarders, athletes. That's what I recommended to you when you're collecting bodies worth knowing. People who are not thinking about the camera. If people are thinking about the camera and you've got a photographer saying, okay, a little to the left, okay, tilt that over, yeah, straighten that up, then they're concerned with the graphic design, and you can end up destroying the impulse that made it worth looking at. Greg Knott, is there any realistic sculpture that has been shown to be unable to truly be actualized? Of course. You couldn't actualize a bunch of Michelangelo's sculptures, and you couldn't actualize a number of these figures that Bridgman does. What do you think? Look at that. Sculptors can do anything they want. You know, here's the subtext of a number of questions that I'm getting from a number of you. We found this out, that sometimes people think teachers have more than they have. A lot of questions are, does this exist? Does that exist? And pretty much anything you ask, it does exist. And can you? And is it possible to? And should you? And those answers are always yes and no. I want to point us back to this. One thing you should do if you're developing your skills as an artist is to be aware of the, quote, certain amount of material, unquote, that Robert Beverly Hale said that an artist should study. Okay, I'm not done. I want to carry through with this graphic design thing. Here's what Bridgman means by rhythm and balance in design. We want this image, this rectangle, this thing we're making, this picture. We want this image to be a playground that isn't all the same activity. You say, oh, I get it, Marshall. You're saying we should paint playgrounds. No. Nothing to do with literal playgrounds. This is a playground. You can have a battlefield, and when you make the picture, think of it as a playground for the eye, figuratively. And what does a playground have? It's not all monkey bars. We want some variety, and not just arbitrarily, not just accidental variety. We want to design a good playground where it goes from one thing to another, to another, to another with a sense of, well, how would you design a good playground? The stuff I want to do with the other kids. The stuff I want to do by myself. The stuff that takes strength. The stuff that takes concentration. And designing a picture compositionally, that's what design is about. That's a whole other skill than anatomy and form and empathy with the figure. It's what makes great artists, even some great artists who don't know anatomy and form. What makes good graphic design? A whole bunch of things. But here's one when it comes to rhythm and balance. Alternations. Not too much of one thing. Back and forthness. Back and forth of curves. Back and forth of lefts and rights, but sometimes left-right with the same kind of curve, sometimes curves that go different. Look what he's showing us over here. There's two kinds of curves. The most famous curve is the circle, where it curves regularly. That's the definition of a circle. It keeps a regular distance from a point all the way around it. This one doesn't. This is a varied curve, but it isn't completely varied. It's more severe and less severe, but it's also all in the same direction, all convex to the outside. This one changes in its severity, but it also says I'll curve this way and curve the other way. When you see evidence of this in his subconscious choice, you say, how did he ever get there? By isolating that thing and working on it. Okay, I'm done with this point. Thank you, Dash. Yu Yang, good idea to reduce poses to curves as an exercise. Indeed. Lena, like dynamics in music. Yes. Dynamics in music. When you're trying to hit the right notes, and it's hard to hit the right notes, it's hard to swell and recede and whisper and suddenly shout for the mischief that a good musician brings to it. That's why you can take a masterpiece like a Beethoven sonata and have a student play it and hit every note right, and it's still a great piece of music, but it isn't a great performance. Because there is so much in those sonatas that can be done just with the dynamics alone. And that's what we're aiming at analogically with these drawings. Any of you try right angle studies? We're going to put you to work here for a half hour. Let's go to the official Nicolaides exercise of the right angle study. Work from a half-hour pose using pencil and a large sheet of paper. Whatever you're using right now, you got paper and a pencil. I'm just going to read the first part of this. During the first half of the pose, draw not what you see, but what you think you would see if you were sitting at the left side of the model instead of in front of him or her. You see a front view, but you will draw from imagination a profile view. Let's give it a shot. We want to look at this guy from this point of view. Now, let's use a little logic to start. That means the front part of him will be at the right and the back part of him will be at the left. So there's a pretty good chance that his torso is going to be in a position like this, and the legs, one leg is going to go out there like that, and the other leg is going to go out there like that. And the arm, let's see, one of these arms is going to go something like that, and the other one's going to go something like that. Now, I'm giving too much away, but I'm just trying to orient you. What would it look like from the side where he is aiming to our right? And I'm going to shut up for a minute. And if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A. Nino, you started by the arm. Is there a better way to start? Yeah. I think the torso is better. Because the position of the torso, you move it a little bit and every limb on it, it carries with it. But you can hold the torso still and move the arms around. Are you about ready? There is so much to be learned from that. Here's what I want to recommend. MyBridge's images are all over the internet, so you're not going to be lacking for opportunities to see his stuff. But do you see how if you get together with a friend, or if you're the introvert type who likes to work alone, that you could spend half an hour not even drawing, but just noticing the position of this hand and saying, there's the same hand over there. The position, oh, look of this foot. And that's the same foot. Here's what you can't tell. You can't tell that this leg is ever so slightly closer to us at the top than at the bottom. That means a cross contour would ever so slightly go. Why? Because this portion of the knee is a little closer to the camera than that portion. But that's instructive. Look at how long that ulna, let me change color so that this is a little clearer. The elbow right there, the proximal end of the ulna and the end of the ulna, which is the bump on the little finger side of the wrist. Look at how, if we are looking at it from the front, goes from here to here. How did it get so short? Well, remember yesterday, we saw that even though it's not foreshortened in this position, we're looking at it tipped, so it's going to be foreshortened, and it's clearly coming toward us. So a rubber band around a convex form would go that way. Here's another thing. When I look at this arm, it looks to me like the shoulder is closer to me and the elbow is further away. That would be the way I'd interpret it. When I look over here at the right, nothing could be further from the truth. This thing came medially, that toward the center. That shoulder is way further away from the camera than that elbow. which means that if I'm going to properly interpret this over here, I must interpret it this way. But I want you to see why that illusion is happening. The reason why it looked to me like it was going away was because there's an anatomical phenomenon, which is that the pectoralis major and the deltoid go there, and when they curve that way, which they do, they're going into the arm and they're curving that way. When they curve that way, they start to give the illusion that they're going away from us with an arrowhead like that. They aren't going away from us. That arm is coming toward us. Now, do you see in this little analysis that I'm doing that comparing two 90-degree views, one of the students yesterday, I think it was Jonathan in our crit group, said, "What's the advantage of 90 degrees?" Jonathan, I have put together this slide. The 90-degree thing had purpose. Let's take another picture. Let's see. We can be pretty sure with those horizontal lines that we're going to have a torso. We're going to know that that is his left leg, and his left leg is going to be over here. And it sure seems to me that knee's going to be up there. And it sure seems to me that that foot's going to come out there, something like that. And it sure seems to me that this leg is going to come down there all the way down to there. And then let's see, will that leg go out there like that? And that leg be, it's going to be something like that. I'm going to stay quiet and let you work on this one. I think this will be the last one that we take 3 or 4 minutes on. Somebody asked, how can we calculate the position of the arm? How could we calculate how the arm is? There's only one way we can know anything. We know that the elbow is there, and we know that the shoulder is here. So the only thing we know is that in the drawing that we do, it's going to go from this high to this low. Now, Nino, this does not tell us whether it's going out toward us, that the elbow is closer, or that the elbow is going away. You know what I would guess. I would guess if I were going to put a light blue line on there, I would guess that it's coming toward us. The elbow is closer and the shoulder is further away. So I'd put that shoulder, I'd have to get the body first, and I'd put that elbow here. For all we know, when we go into the next picture, it may be telling us, whoa, you were wrong. We'll find out in a minute. Ira says, it's so fun stuff. Love it. Messy, but done. Okay, here we go. Watch the screen. Hey! It wasn't, I wasn't too far off. It's going down the amount that we knew it would go down. It's going down from here to here, just a little bit, right? That far, but the elbow is slightly coming toward us. So to use yesterday's way of thinking, we would put a rubber band around that upper arm. If we're thinking of it as a cylinder, watch this, that would barely be open, barely curve convex, because it's going away that way. Hey, watch over here. If you can see the yellow line that I'm drawing, what do we know about that? This is really going away from the eye. Therefore, that foreshortened limb would have an extremely curved rubber band around it. And by the time it gets over there to the wrist, would segue into a block. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, where a round form and a block form wedge together. I did this last night. I started out with a head in a position like that, and then I drew this one from a right angle view, and it took me over a half hour, maybe about 40 minutes, to analyze it, and I got it because I'd done it before. But you know what happened? About 40 minutes into it, when I tried to do this one, I got so confused. That it's like the coach. It's like the drill sergeant trying to do the monkey bars, and he slips off the monkey bars after the second attempt and lies there in the dirt saying, "Help me, help me." It was pathetic. I felt so embarrassed. And so I set it aside and came back to it later and recognized I had gotten it all wrong. And there is one secret. If you're going to swivel it 90 degrees this way, and you want some hints about how to swivel it the other way, the silhouette of this one, if your camera is far back, the silhouette of this one will be pretty much the same silhouette of this one in reverse. Did you know that? Some of you do know that. Here's what can help with these. There's a couple things. Horizontal lines help. Oh, horizontal lines, if you're doing it from a real model, will drive you crazy down here. I mentioned that yesterday, or maybe it was just to the crit group. Be prepared to hurt. Better to use the MyBridge ones, I think, because they're done with a long lens far away. Now, but I only have about 4 or 5 minutes, I think, I'll spend on talking with you about what went on here. Once I did that one, I named this as the model's left anterior corner of the rib cage. That is, I went into word mode. I wish I had color-coded. This would make it easier if I had used a colored pencil for every X line. Every X line is going to be red. That is the X lines behind and in front, on top and on bottom, all X lines. Red. And then if I want to make all the up and down lines blue, I'm not going to carry through this, but I'm just going to explain. I'm doing this so that I can say those are up and down lines. Now watch, here's why that's important. Over here on the right, these X lines are no longer left to right. The X lines become something like a Z line, but they are X lines. They're going away from us. And here's what I know. I know that if this left front, that's left anterior corner of the rib cage, forward, it's closer to me than this one. How do I know? Because I can see that side. Left front, closer. I actually consciously thought that if I'm over here looking at it, I would see the back. Yeah. Ooh. I'd see the back because it's swiveled front. Whereas if the right front pelvic corner is forward, it's forward. That means that if I were over here and that's pulled forward, I'd see a little of front. Woo! And I know that this angles back, posterior, which means that I could put a line like that. I don't know how deep to make that line, and I don't think I made it deep enough. I think I should have angled that pelvis more that way. How would I know? I could compare the heights over here. That might do it. And it also helps to find a single point, usually the closest point, and track it around. But one problem with that, they do change.
The closest point in one view will not be the closest point in another.
But you see why I spent well over an hour on this, and I wasn't about to try to do a right angle study in front of you. It's easier for your coach to say, yeah, I slipped off the monkey bars last night and show you the bruise. It's less pleasant to have video of the coach slipping off the monkey bars and play it over and over for the delight of everyone else doing the hard work. Okay, now, I did this entirely out of analysis, knowing I was putting you through it, including the legs and placing points for the legs and figuring the weight is on the right leg. That is his right leg, and it's, here it is, it's going in toward the center. But is it going back? By the time I came over to here, I said, yeah, it's going back, because if I put it out here, he'd fall over, and I was using that balance trick. But if you have a hard time, you can always bend a model into these positions and use that to help you figure it out. That's one of the advantages of doing this. But before you turn it and look at it, struggle with it. I'm going to use the analogy that I already used to those who paid all that extra money for the crit sessions, but I'll only take a minute on this. When I was 11 years old, our coach, a good man, with all these 11-year-old boys, had us try to do pull-ups. And there was only one of the whole class of those boys that could do a pull-up, because we were 11 years old. Have you ever looked at an 11-year-old boy's body and you recognize that thing still got child qualities? We were pulling as hard as we could, and we couldn't get ourselves up. And he said, it's not unusual that 11-year-olds cannot do pull-ups. But you know, because I saw doing a pull-up as a masculine achievement that I wanted to in my puberty and early adulthood, if I can do a pull-up, oh, I'm not a kid anymore. And that was the main exercise that I fell in love with, because it was so hard to do it. You may have some of that in you, that if you try this and you find it difficult, if you fail, keep failing, but gradually you start to strengthen the muscle. And if you get one little part, just the head was a little easier because I could think of his face and think that he's a fine person and he's looking at me. No, he's looking away from me, and you can play a game. Anything that'll help you to imagine this, that's useful. But there's one thing about this drawing that sucks, even if it's correct. There's one thing about this drawing that I missed entirely. Anyone want to say what it is? I'm going to admit it. The gesture. All I did was say this way and that way and the other, and I was thinking about, I want to do the rhythm thing. I'm looking up at this one, and it's facing my left. So I'm going to look down at this one, and it's facing my right, down to my right, up to my left, down to my left. I'm trying to find a rhythm between these two positions, and I got them, and I said, good, now I'll go with it. And it's a clunky-looking, bad marionette that I never got up on my feet, and I never thought about, why would somebody twist their head like this and swivel their hips like that unless they were just in an awkward state? I remember years ago, a colleague of mine who I esteemed very much, I was working on a drawing that I'd put probably 40 hours into with a lot of detail. And I admired him so much. And I asked him, how do you feel like it's going? He said, I admire your patience and your skill with your technique, but why you would put that much time into a character that's that boring, I don't understand. And the moment it came out of his mouth, there was nothing in me that wanted to argue with him. I just knew that it was true, and I had been blind to the fact that it wasn't a character worth developing. Well, that's why we're taking a whole session and a half to do this. Look what Nicolaides said about right angle studies. By the way, if you hurt yourself doing these, you have my compassion. But look what he says. The drawing is to be done as much as possible in the spirit of a gesture drawing. Naturally, you will have to stop and think to figure out where the various parts are in relationship to each other, but think always of what they are doing. Devote the remainder of the pose to a checkup where you actually go to the position from which you imagine the figure and note the difference between the actual pose and the drawing you made. He also gives you permission. You slipped off the monkey bars, do it again, do it again, do it again. Don't try to fix what you did. Do not correct your drawing or try to make a new one. Simply notice your mistakes. Of course, you will not always have a front view, etc. All right. Dear students, this was to give you permission to do this, but it was also to tell you it may be more than you're ready for. Jonathan Brett Schneider, Marshall, why do your boxes are inconsistent in thickness? Because I didn't pay attention to that. I was just trying to get the position. Would you recommend trying to do this exercise on graph paper? Yeah, but remember that when things swivel, they might not always line up, because when things get closer to you, they might have a little perspective on there. Now I'm going to show you a successful right angle study that I did several years ago at the Natural History Museum with my animal drawing students. But before we do, let's read another part of Kimmo Nicolaides' right angle study. In right angle drawing, we're making use of something which I have called, for lack of a better name, structural imagination. That's a pretty good name, Kimmo. Some of my students have asked if this exercise is a matter of using the imagination. To answer that, it would be necessary to define imagination, which is far from our purpose. What we really do in this particular exercise is to attempt to assemble from a different point of view what is in front of us. It's an effort to construct in the mind by using the knowledge from past experiences. He has you do other exercises like this too. Look what I put in bold. This is worth reading. The great danger of drawing the thing which is in front of you, as what seems to be 98% of university life drawing classes. The great danger of drawing what's in front of you is that you may end up merely copying. When you cannot copy, you must draw with your full intelligence. A real appetite is created for the study which follows when you look at the thing you've tried to visualize. Yeah! Now you recognize that perspective has everything to do with drawing organic forms, not just for breaking the body into forms, but from where you will put the eye, and to put the eye above or below. Those are skills that most artists want to have. Even if you don't, it's nice to know it exists. Now, let me show you one that I did and took about 2 hours with at the Natural History Museum. Those were some bones. I was pretty in shape with this, too. I mean, I was doing demos for students. And one of the things I showed is to work from a sagittal section. You see, if you're working from a sagittal section, and notice that I make the sagittal section, it has a line in there that goes like that. It's thick. It's like a credit card. That's why I put those lines going off to the vanishing point. And then the Z line is obvious. The depth line that's going off to a vanishing point that way is obvious. And I did that whole analysis. And then, without going over there toward the front, I did this. And how did I do it? I swapped out the X and Z lines. You see, in the previous slide, the Z line was going that way. Now X is going that way. The X line was going that way, and I drew the credit card. I drew this thick pane of glass that's in the center of the figure, and then worked out from there. Now, it's no great drawing. It's from a set of bones. It's not going to go down in history like Bridgman's, but it was an exercise so that I could then free myself up. What does he tell us here? Future right angle study. Those of you who it was too hard, you were afraid to try it, you tried it, and you hurt yourself. Future right angle study. For the present, you are to consider none of the small details of the figure in this exercise, but only the gesture. Great big swirl of scribble lines. Later, you may devote an hour to each right angle study, drawing lightly in the beginning so that an eraser may be used. Don't marry the first person you like. And then carrying it forward with all the skill of draftsmanship you possess. But always begin with a gesture study. In the checkup for a 1-hour study, make a second drawing. As you progress, you can make use of the same kind of effort to go further in the way of detail. Yeah, that was going further in the way of detail. I knew animal anatomy. I knew each one of these bones by then. I knew that this leg had a problem. It was too much going in the same direction as that one. I needed to pull it out there. And if you pull it out there, it's going to come more toward us, you see. Some of you who are in this class have been in my animal drawing class, and you know exactly what we're talking about. Then you could pull that leg so it was coming directly toward us. But see, I was getting it too much of in a side view. And that takes, what, 6 months to a year of some serious study of animal anatomy. This was technical and analytical. This is what Nicolaides is telling you. Don't start that way. Start like a baby. Start with sensation. And once you learn the technical stuff, don't let the technical stuff be the most important thing. Animators know that if you put a dot on that wrist right there, the end of the ulna, and you carry that dot through, all the way through, and you were to do a little light trail that makes motion. And if you were to do the same thing with something like his knee, which won't move that much, it'll barely move, but it will move a little. And with the shoulder, which is going to go from there, and it's going to go all the way over to there. And the curve of the chest. And not only the curve of the chest, which will change its position any point, these will make rhythmic arcs that are beautiful to look at, even if they aren't human. They're just beautiful shapes, beautiful patterns. But there's other things. As an artist, you can see even in this that line goes into that line and makes a beautiful curve. And that this line, which makes both a concave and a convex because the muscles create convexity. That is the thing we were talking about earlier, that lines as abstract designs, apart from their human anatomy-ness, are part of an artist's skill. But they are two separate skills. Strike the pose and analyze. Choose a pose that you like. Strike the pose. Notice where pressure and weight are. Describe it out loud. Draw the pose. Do this several times with different poses. Look back and forth between the pose and the drawing, if need be. And as you look at the pose, empathize with where the weight was so that while we're drawing, we think about weight. And don't have it happen like a clunky marionette. Think about where things are moving and whether they'd carry through further or whether they'll go the other way. And switching gears here, everybody, changing attention, moving from one set of disciplines to another, notice it as straight and curved lines and redraw it as an abstract design of straight and curved lines. Are you ready? Here we go. Phoenix, you got yours in first. Phoenix, I am so impressed. I have had the privilege of teaching you for whatever it's been. 2 years this summer, right? And I have seen you grow. And I think, especially if you like doing this, Phoenix, I think that if you give this another 20, 30, 40 hours, this could be really pivotal in your stylistic design growth. But even what you've done already may be enough. You cannot know whether it's going to take in future drawings, but I'm just very impressed. Now, we'll look at this stuff and talk more during our crit, because we are limited for time here. Luca! I am so pleased. I mean, you are applying every lesson in there. I feel as if when you did this, the reason you kept digging into there is because you felt like this person is scrunching back and stretching out. And then to turn it into graphic design where you say, I don't want it to be, if it's going to curve this way and it's a complete curve and a gentle curve, and then I'm going to make a pinch in there where it comes to a point, and then I'm going to make straight lines and curved lines, and they're both long, but then there's a short straight line, and then there's a harder short straight line, and you just, I don't have anything to say except that I'm impressed. Hey, everybody. All of you who are observers, as you're watching this, you do not have to pay me money to do this. I'm including showing these students' work in here so you can say, hey, yeah, I can do that too. I didn't tell anybody in the crit group much more than I'm telling you in here. Brendan, the digitalness of it is evident, but you are doing the thing. I sense that when you did this, you were aware of, I feel like the reason you dug into those lines is that you felt like that's where you'd feel it. You say, now, if any of you are saying, Marshall, I notice that on the extended side where the rib cage is stretched back, so that this is stretched, that Luca's putting all those dark lines in there. And over here, he's doing the same thing. He's putting the dark lines on the stretch side and not on the crunch side. And now, when I look at Brendan is putting the dark lines on the crunch side. I'm confused. Which way is correct? What's the answer? Open-minded, bright, problem-solving students? It doesn't make any difference. You're going with the sensation you feel. Some people might feel that stretch is the thing that sticks out to them and crunch is not, and another person might feel the opposite way. There is no rule. But look what we're doing. We have separated the extended side from the flexed side in our thinking. And just in asking that question, at least you're aware that there's two different sides and you may never have been. And one can be treated one way, and however you treat it, it might be a good idea to treat the other one the other way. Maybe not. Maybe you'll treat them both the same way and then treat another part different. Rhythm is both understood with a metronome and time signatures, but I can tell you, the Beatles did not come up with those great songs by looking at a chart of time signatures and trying to conform to it. If you're going to come up with your music, you're going to come up with it because you've got a feeling that it should be this way, and that you should at some point break it up, and then at some point you should get louder, And some point you should get softer. And those things come from emotion. Those things come from intuition. They do not come from logic until after the fact. And that's what we're getting at with this. This sensation thing is to heighten awareness of it, because without awareness of it, it's going to be academic. It's going to be sterile. It's going to be from a test tube, not from passion. Etienne, you're doing it. The more important thing about this drawing is that you felt the sensation. If it didn't get into your drawings, at least you felt the sensation. Did you know that there was a time when your favorite singer could not even pronounce words? There was a time when your favorite singer wasn't even able to construct a sentence, but they were going to become your favorite singer. It just took time. It took time in getting familiar with it. What about this? Oh, Clarita. Lovely pieces. Even if I sense pain, you've given us, there are blues songs. Blues came out of pain. And yet, what is remarkable is how many of those blues songs that even have tragic lyrics. My man died last night, my heart is broken in two, and yet the song is upbeat and it's got a happy, there's an irony in that can make a song interesting. Sometimes when you take something that is negative and give it a beautiful twist, that empowers it. But these are really well done. I'm just so happy. I found it harder to get an accurate gesture than an accurate block figure. The more dynamic poses are difficult to hold. I think some are impossible. Some are impossible. You can put it in any position you want, and you're not going to hurt it. You can experiment with extremizing the poses. Romana, look at how you split two sides of the brain. The analytical side that chooses the coronal and sagittal and transverse planes and gave them different colors and angled the lines. And then you went over here and you went and gave us a little rhythmic dance of thickness and thinness and curvedness and straightness. This is the varied skill business. This is what we were talking about. Okay. Sasha, a little hard to see when they're that small, but when I look into them, see there's a lot going on in there. And what I see is a lot of arrows and I see a lot of line analysis. And that was the idea. After you've done the pose, notice. Let's see. Let's go back here. On the poses you draw, notice or analyze. How? Well, it's up to you. Placement of weight, directions of motion, straight and curved line. That is what you did. You noticed, and then you made up your own analysis with arrows, etc. Jonathan. Well, you certainly went for shapes after you got the poses. And you also understood this business of that's pitch, that's yaw, that's pitch also. Here's what I love, folks. Look at this. Any of you know who E.C. Segar is? He was a comic strip artist who did Popeye back in the first half of the 20th century. They're marvelous drawings. I mentioned to the Crit group yesterday, of the great artists of history, let's name some. Michelangelo, Rembrandt. Oh, we could put 20 in there, those great European masters that came out of the Renaissance into the Baroque period and then into the 20th century. In the 20th century, the great drawers, many of them, maybe most of them, were the cartoonists. Cartoonists and animators. There's an era around the turn of the 20th century into the 20s and 30s of great drawers. And they're doing what Michelangelo did. Michelangelo was a cartoonist who just happened to put core shadows and reflected light and make forms that are closer to anatomy. Michelangelo dared to do with the figure something like that, but with a different aesthetic. Look at that calf muscle. Look at that awareness of the belly of the gastrocnemius, and then a straight line, and look at how the straight line goes into this. Folks, this is what's exciting about drawing. Next assignment. The model takes 1-minute gesture poses as usual, and you make scribble drawings. Instead of drawing the pose you see, draw what you think the model may do next. Of course, the pose will seldom be the pose the model actually takes, but here's the important thing. The effort to realize will help you to understand the forces at work. You have been empathizing. You could make this go even further, but I don't think he's in a position very easily to do that. He could pull it back. What would happen next? Could you draw this 2 or 3 times, just as cartoons, to see what happens if he pulls first or if he pulls first? Is he going to push down in there? If he is, if he's going to push down into there, this pectoralis will harden. It will tug that arm down. But if he is going to lift it up, the pectoralis will relax. Muscles on the back. That's advanced. Here's your assignment. 2 of them. Sorry to give you 2. You can choose 1. Choose 12 shots from video sequences of bodies in action. Well, that'll take a lot of time. Choose 3. You must have video clips on your hard drive of athletes in action or something that's marvelous to see. Strike the pose. Notice where the pressure and weight are. Draw the pose. You've already done that. Draw the next significant position from imagination. Don't worry about getting it correct. Why? Because remember, he told us it is the effort that will help you understand. Don't worry about getting it correct. Seek the potential position and then advance the video frames and compare. That's one thing to do. The other thing to do is to go through the Bridgman torso images. I've given you the page numbers. Bridgman has got all sorts of twisted torsos in there. Try taking some of those twisted torsos on these pages. Now that you understand them as blocks, and if it's too hard to do a 90-degree position, or if you just say, look, I'm not going to put that much energy into it, I'll do it next month. Just try putting them in different positions. This way there's no temptation to merely copy. One must invent. Right now, July 2020 is your summer. This is where, if you take this seriously, observer or participant, if you are doing this work and hanging out with other people and pursuing it out of the passion of it, you'll find that boot camp has its pain, but boot camp has some satisfaction too. You know, there's a certain thing of do the obstacle course that's like you do on a playground for the fun of it anyway. Okay, see you tomorrow at the same time. That was session 5 from our 12-session summer boot camp back in the day. You'll find more videos, live sessions, and updates on other offerings at marshallart.com.